Les Miserables. Okay, so I want to start this review in a sort of roundabout way. A few weeks ago, when Oscar nominations for 2019 have been revealed, there was a significant uproar among cinephiles online about another French film, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, being completely snubbed in the foreign film category. People were complaining that such an absolute masterpiece of cinema got no recognition. Now, me personally, I didn't connect with that film as much. I appreciate that it's technically well done, but it just didn't work for me on a totally subjective level. Even then, I'm still willing to admit you could make a case for it being an award contender. Now, if you know the details of the Oscar nomination process, it turns out that it wasn't actually the Academy that snubbed the film. See, the way foreign film category works is that each country outside the US can submit one movie for consideration, and France simply did not choose Portrait of a Lady on Fire. They submitted Les Miserables instead. Now, that's pretty telling, and it made me have certain expectations. Again, I was not floored by Portrait, so those expectations were still reasonable, but I'd hoped for a good film. Turns out, it's excellent. The story takes place over 2 days in Paris, specifically in Montfermeil. A newly relocated police officer goes on patrol with two other guys who want to show him the ropes, explain what type of communities are in the neighborhood, who to know, who to respect, who should in turn respect them. It is very apparent from the get-go that the policemen are skirting the line between law and organized crime themselves. They abuse their powers, aren't shy of shaking up young kids if they want to question them, and they have dealings with local community leaders, let's put it this way. And since the neighborhood is pretty rough, we can infer that those leaders may or may not be on the right side of the law themselves. So the officers are very clearly bullies, cowboys with too much testosterone, riding the high of being given power over regular folk. During the patrol, something happens, something that shouldn't have happened, and it's recorded by a kid with a drone. The policemen then try to recover the footage as it could damage them, and thus the main plot kicks into gear. So the first thing I want to say is that with this setup of the film and the trailer for it, I expected it to be pretty one-dimensional, a bleak, depressing look into police brutality and how this rampant power abuse is damaging for the community, and the people considered criminals by the policemen are just trying to live their lives normally under the heel of authority. It's not that simple though. The movie goes to great lengths to show us that yes, the policemen are massive douchebags, but they're not 100% evil, and sometimes their actions could even be called justified in the face of what's on the other side. That other side is mainly kids from poor families who cause trouble around the block. That sounds pretty innocent and begins that way, but we quickly learn that those kids actually do break the law quite often, and their mischief is more harmful than it may have seemed. And also, the way they clash with the police, there is real violence on both sides. This paints a picture where most of the people involved in this story are shitty, but I don't think you could easily classify any of them as straight up villains. Each of the groups that operate in the community has its own perspective and is simply looking out for its own interest. And because of lack of compromise from any side, there is conflict, a conflict where nobody is fully in the right or fully in the wrong. That presents us with an interesting philosophical question that is pretty much at the heart of the film. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Was the police always so brutal that the kids' behavior is a natural counter response to that? Or maybe it's the local populace that are so unruly that the police had no choice but to start resorting to more extreme measures. Regardless of the answer, because the movie does eventually point to one of them, there exists a problem of how, and in fact, if this broken, rotten system can be overthrown. Can this spiral of hate and violence and, and aggression end somehow? Or is it impossible at all and we're stuck in it until the end times? Or a third option, will it get progressively worse until it inevitably explodes? I think these deliberations on social issues and that unrest boiling just underneath the surface of a functioning community is why the title is a reference to Victor Hugo's novel. It does touch on some of the same problems while modernizing them in a seamless way. I think that through it all, The movie is masterful at managing its atmosphere. It builds and releases pressure and tension in a way that reminded me of Sicario, which is pretty high praise. There are several moments where you're just on the edge of your seat, but there are also times of relief, and they are perfectly sprinkled throughout the story. There is one scene towards the end. Basically, it is the end of the first day of the story, which is a montage of the characters and how they end that day on the background of a setting sun. It is just mesmerizing to watch that entire sequence. There are almost no words. The ones that are there could basically be background noise, but the image speaks volumes itself. I also want to say that the pacing of the film is damn near perfect. There was never a moment where I felt bored or I thought that the breathing room that the film gives us is in any way unnatural. The story progresses very, very naturally, very seamlessly from one moment to the next. It doesn't waste time, but it also doesn't artificially extend the sequences. Like the search for the drone footage, you think it will take most of the movie, but figuring out who has it and where is a pretty straightforward manner. And then it just goes on to the next plot point and the next one and the next one. There's also this 2-day structure where the first day ends and you think, wow, this was an amazing story, but it's pretty much complete now. But as it turns out, there's 25 more minutes in the film, and that final act is built directly on the foundations that everything before it built. And it's this amazing feat where before it happens, before that last act starts, you think there's nothing more to say here. But after it finishes, it feels like the most natural thing, and that the movie would be incomplete without it. It's like this crowning jewel in what was already a very good film. And the very end of it, the last scene, the last shot of the film, coupled with the quote from Hugo's novel that comes right after, holy shit, does it hit. I mean, it left me speechless for a while, but it also made me think quite a lot about the interpretation of it all. Because the ending is a fantastic comment on the situation painted by the movie before it, but it also leaves open a question for the audience. So, to sum all of this up, I have to say I am in no way surprised now that Les Miserables was submitted for Oscars instead of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It is such a complete, thought out, provocative yet subtle film. It just takes the cake for me between those two. I definitely recommend that everyone sees it.